Hey everybody, welcome to the History of FMW. This is episode 14. We're going to be covering the second half of 1995. As always, I'm joined by Bahu Brett. Now, on our last show, we stopped right when Onita had his retirement match against Hayabusa. Onita has now left FMW, and that's where we're going to join it right now. And there's a lot to go over. First, Brett, if you could go over the current business of FMW, like who's in charge, who owns it, who's got the money.
All right. So like I talked about last episodes, Onita ended up convincing Shoichi Arai, who was the ring announcer and he worked in the office, to take over FMW after Onita was going to retire and leave wrestling altogether. And if it wasn't for Arai taking the offer, FMW just would have closed down right there after Onita retired. But Arai, he took over because Onita's company of FMW actually was in debt. And so Arai ended up starting up his own FMW company, but the issue was he didn't really have any money to start it up, so he ended up having to borrow money from Onita. So Onita actually ended up lending him $100,000 to start the company, but right away, $50,000 of those dollars went to Onita to buy the supply, everything that came with FMW, the championship belts, the photocopier to make magazines and whatnot, programs, everything that was in the dojo. They had an advertisement car that they would drive around and stuff. And Arai took over these responsibilities and took over all this. So he ended up spending half the money that he that he borrowed from Onita. He borrowed $100,000 and he gave $50,000 right to Onita to start his FMW back up.
So immediately I've got to ask, why were they in debt so bad if they were making so much money?
Because he was still paying he was paying himself so much money. So he was on payroll. He was, like we mentioned, he gave himself $300,000 for his retirement tour or retirement show. That was money that he pocketed, but it didn't go into the company itself. On top of paying Mr. Pogo $120,000 a year, on top of paying Matsunaga or even more because he had a signing bonus also. He was paying Matsunaga $120,000 a year. He was paying Kanamura $120,000 a year. So all this he was giving himself so much money as well that the company itself ended up being in debt. But there was no real eager to make sure that they made the money back because Onita knew he was closing the company down. So there was no real reason to try and money into this company that he had no interest in keeping after May 5th. So might as well pocket the money, keep the money himself personally, and all the wrestlers got money out of it as well.
Wow. Another thing that you wrote, you mentioned that FMW was forced to switch the video distribution company that they were using. What did that mean for the company?
Yeah, so a lot of issues also came up with Onita retiring that the old FMW had that the new FMW didn't get to benefit from. One was their video distribution, which was from BMG Video, which was a main video company in Japan at the time. And they did one FMW series with Hayabusa, and it didn't do that well. And the company thought, without Onita, FMW is nothing, and we don't want to supply this. We don't want to supply the company with this. And that was a main way of getting money back then because of how the business was ran and everything. And also, with FMW not having television, it was the way to get people to see everything. So they ended up losing that deal. They also ended up losing their dojo as well because Onita was friends with the sponsor at the old dojo, so they had to move dojos as well. So all these issues came up with having to pretty much start. They didn't get the benefit of being the old FMW. They had to pretty much start over. So they ended up, like I said, getting a new video company. They ended up getting bailed out by Toshiba EMI, which was a music company, pretty much, and they agreed to release the videos for FMW. And what ended up happening was Gaura, the TV company, they agreed to tape the shows. So FMW luckily didn't have to pay for professional video cameras. They had a company come in from Gaura, videotape it so that, and Gaura didn't pay them or anything like that, but Gaura would air the shows on their network, but also FNW could use that footage and release it on Toshiba EMI for their company, so that they could release it on video commercial tapes. And that was pretty much where most of the money was coming in at the time. And we'll get into it. They were struggling and everything, and the video company money really helped them out at that time period.
What is the reaction of the talent? Like, is anybody worried? Are they angry? Are they hopeful?
They're hopeful. It's just kind of starting their own business, starting a new business, starting fresh. Everyone, it was kind of like, if we can work hard, we can make this work, make it as a team, because we talked about it last episode. A lot of the wrestlers were not a fan of Tarzan Goto and Onita. They respected Onita, but he was always on top, and it was always going to be him. He was always going to be the star of the show. Now everyone kind of had, they had their own way of kind of getting over. It was a better way to get over for the Kanemuras, for the Matsunagas. It allowed them to get over, have a better chance of getting over and kind of making this company succeed, and it wasn't just all on Onita.
All right, cool. And finally, is there any office talk about what to do about the death matches? Like, are they here to stay, or are they going to go?
They're going to focus more on the strong style, actual straight matches. They felt like this was a mainstream way that they can get mainstream attention, because New Japan and All Japan were bigger companies using that method, and they knew without Onita they couldn't excel in the death match or market it as a death match company without Onita. So they kept it because they still had a Mr. Pogo, they still had a Matsunaga on the rosters at this time, but they phased the death matches down, and with Hayabusa, his strength was going to be straight matches, so the regular straight matches became the main pretty much draw of the show.
All right, cool. Now, real quick, going back to May 5th, one note that we didn't really talk about was that the Sheik had a medical issue before the show started. What happened to him?
Well, he actually was on the show. He wrestled on the show, but he had a heart attack the day afterwards. So he wrestled the match against Damien the day of, and then the next day he suffered a heart attack in Tokyo, and that ended up ending his career. He ended up suffering nerve damage in his leg due to the heart attack. So he never wrestled again, but he made a full recovery. He lived another 8 years or so afterwards, but it ended his career.
All right, not cool. Also in this time, Big Titan, he jumped ship from FMW to War. Did he leave FMW, or did they just see no need for him anymore?
Yeah, he just stopped getting booked at this time period. And again, this was kind of towards the end of Onita and whatnot. And so they just kind of phased him out. He had already had his feud with Gladiator at this point, several-month feud with him. There was no one else really to feud with because, again, he was a babyface, and Onita, this was towards the end where everything was just completely on Onita. FMW at the end of Onita's run was just all about Onita, no one else, essentially. And so there was no real reason to fly him in or whatnot. So he ended up getting a deal with War a couple months later and wrestling for them.
All right. And also in this, just because I want to talk about this, sometime in May, Geto and Jado, they released a singing CD album. How popular are these albums?
I don't know necessarily about their album, but it's another way of making money. They're not hitting the top 20 and top charts or anything like that, but they're sold in CD stores and they make the company's money. FMW around this time also released a CD with Hayabusa's theme, and it made good money. It made the company a good deal of money. Just based, it's another outlet to make money essentially. So you have the videos and then you have the music. So it makes money, but it's not that's making anybody rich or anything.
Yeah, the last time I was there, they had Yuko Miyamoto and Asami Kodaka. They did a duet CD that they were selling. I'm just like,
Yeah.
these scarred up guys are selling this karaoke album to little girls? Okay, cool. So going on to FMW news, they started their tour on May 17th, and in the first show, the Gladiator pins Hayabusa in the main event, and on the rest of the tour, Hayabusa's team, the main events are all these six-man tags, and Hayabusa loses, I think, every single one here. What is the angle with Hayabusa he comes out the gate and he loses for the entire tour?
Well, he lost. He got pinned in the very first match against the Gladiator. Going after that, it would just be his team losing. He wouldn't take the falls. So he took the fall in the first match against the Gladiator to set up the feud to kind of establish Hayabusa versus the Gladiator, so that his eventual win over the Gladiator would become a bigger deal. So if he had gotten the wins right away, it wouldn't have mean as much. But they wanted to start a kind of an angle where to build him up. Yeah, he's losing now, but to make it a bigger deal when he gets the big win at the end.
And how is the attendance for the tour?
It bombed big time. They drew only about 250 fans. These tours it's empty. There's not that many fans at all. They actually Megumi Kudo is becoming one of the top draws at this point, based off her having an established identity in FMW, and that's the issue. Hayabusa wasn't that established at this point. You go from Onita and the death matches and everything that was going on with them to here's a guy that he worked the undercard in FMW years ago, and now you put a mask on him. I don't know who that is, and drawing around outside Tokyo, it just nobody knew to come. They probably shouldn't have started with a tour across the country. They probably should have started in Tokyo, but that's how it was all set up, and they toured the country, and that tour bombed, and they did horrible.
We haven't talked much about the women's roster in a while, but they're going to play a much larger role going forward. What has been the story of them for the past few years, and how does the FMW women, how are they perceived in the media now versus in, say, 1991?
Megumi Kudo, over the last couple of years, had gained, like I said, she actually had become a draw herself. She's probably the only woman that was any bit of a draw. Now, granted, it was only 250, 300 people, so it's not like she was drawing sellouts or anything like that just on her name alone, but it was she had a fan base and everything. And what they're doing, they're going to kind of focus on her being more of the Atsushi Onita deathmatch baby face at this point, and it helped because her main rival was against Shark Tsuchiya, who is not a good wrestler at all. She kind of had that Mr. Pogo athleticism, and so they kind of turned them. And again, the women were in the mid card and everything, but it kind of turned. They kind of used that Onita Pogo feud and made it into the women's, put it to women's matches. And as we go forward, Megumi Kudo is having there's barbed wire matches. The first ever barbed wire women's match. There's a no ropes barbed wire women's match. Shark Tsuchiya, fire, everything is getting used kind of to promote, to kind of help with the women, because they're going to need to pull more weight without Onita on the show.
Now, one other thing that I wanted to bring up was FMW's original backers were the magazines. And I know that the wrestling, the magazines back then, they held power. They promoted the big show in April that we talked about the previous show. Are the magazines in any way actively trying to help FMW get back on their feet?
Yeah, they helped out a lot actually, especially with Hayabusa at the beginning. after the Onita match, FMW really pushed Hayabusa to be the star, and they put out kind of a mass media outlet for Hayabusa and had him take all these pictures and everything for FMW as well as the magazines. And lot of the pictures that you see about Hayabusa, even to this day, if you look them up online, they're going to be pictures that were taken by the magazines and everything just days after the Onita match, where he's all scarred up and everything. And he looks, I mean, it's a cool. He has a real cool look already with the mask and everything. And again, I was talking about how he didn't really draw at the beginning, but nobody really knew anything about him, or he hadn't really been established or anything, but there was a general consensus he has a cool look and everything, on top of the fact that he has all these scars and burn marks still from the Onita match. Well, the magazines really picked up on this, and they had an interview with him and in a couple issues leading up to the first tour in May '95. And then after on the first, on one of the first tours with Hayabusa, he does a Phoenix Splash, and that's never been seen before at the time. He was the first person to do this move. And Pro Wrestling Weekly, the #1 magazine company, they do a two-page spread on just this move being the Phoenix Splash, just showing what he did in order to get to that move, and it got over. And that was kind of the very first sign of Hayabusa getting over, is based off that move, and it was due to the magazines helping him out, getting it in kind of this nationwide kind of attention.
Cool. Now, one guy who's back is actually Horace Boulder. He left previously, now he's back. Is there any story to that?
He just had, like I mentioned, he was working his Florida promotion, and with Titan gone, and just Mike Awesome and Horace Boulder were related, and I'm sure it was just a favor through Mike Awesome to bring him back to have another tag partner. And he had, like I mentioned, he had helped Mike Awesome and Horace Boulder had helped Hayabusa get ready in Florida before the Kawasaki match, so he had good ties with the company. Wasn't super pushed or anything, but it was kind of be Mike Awesome's tag partner.
All right, cool. And what, just so I can ask, because we're going to ask again at the end, what does Onita have in store for 1995 as of right now? Like, what are his plans?
He's gonna do a samurai soap opera. He's gonna film a movie, and so he's expecting to be a household name any day now, essentially, where he's going to be a big movie star. He's going to be in this TV show. Everyone's going to know. And he already had a lot of notoriety. We had talked about him being in talk shows and everything that were on national TV. So a lot of people knew him, but he was expecting to be one of the main movie stars coming up soon, because he was so used to just the build and his fame and celebrity. He was just expecting, if I get out of the wrestling and focus on movies and everything, I'm going to be the biggest star ever because of my charisma and how everything's already turned out. But it didn't really work out that way.
One thing that's always kind of confused me is that I've never seen any of these Onita shows and movies, and you would think that they'd be more prevalent on, like, YouTube and stuff. Oh well.
I've seen them. Yeah, no, I've seen them before. I mean, I've seen them in the Japan video stores and everything. There's actually one. I didn't buy it or anything, but there's a sex scene with Onita and a girl in one of the movies. Yeah, he was in a couple movies, and I know he was in. I think it was one of the like the later Mothra movies or something like that, one of those type of monster movies in Japan. So he was definitely in some movies, but I mean, again, they weren't big blockbuster hits or anything like that.
Wow. I didn't know, like, yeah, I don't know any of that part of the story because there's just no real clips online to find that I could find. Lost in the Shuffle.
Yeah, they're not on. I don't think there are any on YouTube. But.
Yeah, I was looking, but oh well. One last note for the month of May. On May 1st, IWA, they held the famous glass match between Headhunter A and Headhunter B. This is kind of a famous match. It's very brutal for its time. They have plate glasses in boxes, and like I said, it's pretty brutal. What is the idea behind throwing glass in the mix now? We've had the barbed wire, we've had the explosions, we have the thumbtacks. Now we're going onto glass. Do you have any comment on this, or do you know any notes from the wrestlers of the time and what they thought?
Well, it was a cheap way to do a death match. It's not expensive, and it doesn't hurt as much as, let's say, bar, but it can be more dangerous, and it leaves more scars. And I mean, you've seen the Big Japan wrestlers and whatnot, or Freedoms, and their backs are all scarred.
June, IWA, they kind of started announcing the card for the Kawasaki Dream King of the Deathmatch tournament that's going to be in August. The first match signed is actually Tarzan Zangoto versus Dan Severn, and this will be for Severn's NWA title. What led to this match, and who had to okay all of this?
Victor Canones, who was working for IWA, got together with Dan Severn's manager, and talking through with Terry Funk, is kind of a three-way communication. They were able to get the deal done that Dan Severn was going to get the win over Tarzan Goto. I mean, it would never have been happen if Goto was expected to win or anything like that. But Severn agreed to the payday and whatnot, and so they put the match together, and in one of the probably best known non-tournament matches on the show.
Also in June, FMW, they debuted the new Super Leather. Who was this?
That was Mike Kirshner. We had talked about him before, where he had been arrested while in Wing, and he ended up coming back after he got out of jail, and he was wrestling in IWA Japan for a while. There was 2 Leatherface gimmicks going on, and he ended up cutting a deal with FMW to be brought in. The IWA Japan still had the Leatherface gimmick going on with Rick Patterson, so they couldn't use the Leatherface name anymore, but he was the original Leatherface, so they brought him in as Super Leather, kind of have that gimmick of he's even more powerful than the other Leatherface gimmick going on in IWA.
Now, also starting in these tours, the women, the main events are, again, they're like the 6-man tags mostly, but on the undercard, the women are having matches that are, chain matches, street fights, blah, blah, blah. Is there an actual idea of, like, okay, we're not only going to have them brawl during the matches, but we're going to put on steps of, like, chains and like, street fights? Is there any actual push to put the hardcore division on the women?
Well, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, it's just more of to get Megumi Kudo over as a face, doing kind of what Onita did all those years, to have these bloody matches. And it's even more unique because you didn't really see a woman bleed and have these kind of matches. And again, it gets Shark Tashia over in kind of the Mr. Pogo role, doing all these hellacious things to her, choking her with a chain and hitting her over the head with a kendo stick, stuff like that. And Megumi Kudo got more over during this time period than she ever did during the Onita era FMW, because was this girl, with Onita, when Onita was in charge, she had great matches, and now she's able to have these death matches and these bloody matches, seeing a whole different side to, on top of having she had and everything. So it helped get her over even more during this time period. And like I said, she had these historic matches, that first ever women's barbed wire match, and the first ever time a woman bladed as much as she did, and stuff like that, and actually exploding barbed wire.
Which those matches went down as some of the best in the company's history.
Yeah.
So the FMW tour, it ended on June 27th at Kuroken Hall, where the Hayabusa defeated Oya, and he won the Brass Knucks Championship that had been vacated by Onita beforehand. Now, when I watch this from a kayfabe point of view, I'm like, okay, Hayabusa in the tour, he doesn't really win that many matches or anything. How did they arrive at this match to crown the champion?
They just wanted to put the belt on him to establish him, because like you mentioned, he was losing. He was on the losing side of all these matches and everything, and this was to kind of he had lost to Oya earlier on the tour, or I guess the last Corrigan Hall show, he had lost to Oya. He had been pinned by Oya in a 6-man. So this was, again, to set up, showing like, hey, he can handle it. He can be one of the big top guys and everything. And so he ended up having a great match with Oya. Went 25 plus minutes or so. And one of the first real great FMW based matches and everything, he ends up getting the win and ends up getting the title. So again, it establishes him as a top guy. But he goes, I don't want the title if I just beat Oya. I want to show that I really am the best. I want to beat all the wrestlers. So he ends up vacating the title afterwards so that they could have the Grand Slam tournament, which would be a 8-man round robin tournament to show whoever really won that tournament really was the best wrestler in FMW.
Also, at the end of the tour, Yukahide Ueno, he quit FMW. Do you know why?
Yeah, so he also went by the name Battle Ranger, and I've kind of talked about him in the past and everything. There was issues with, pretty much it stems from the jealousy of Hayabusa and everything, and he always never got along with Hayabusa. I talked about Hayabusa's very first match. He ended up to use Ueno's ring gear, and Ueno was such a jerk about it and everything, and he just never liked Hayabusa. And Hayabusa just always really felt it was from jealousy. So Hayabusa always felt that Ueno was jealous of him, and there was always issues with Ueno and Hayabusa. Ueno, because he had 1 year seniority, was always could afford to be a jerk to Hayabusa and living in the dojo and everything. And it was again based off the fact that Ueno was given this mask gimmick called Battle Ranger. He was promised to be a top guy and everything like that, and it never really worked out. And then Hayabusa, here he is. He comes back, and now he's the top guy. When Ueno feels like he's the better wrestler, when he has more seniority, and then Hayabusa's getting the top spot, and he didn't want to deal with that. He that jealousy of just wait, I deserve this spot. He didn't want to work for FMW anymore, so he ended up quitting.
Cool. And where did he go?
He ended up going to War. He was a junior heavyweight for a couple of years in War. So I mean, it's not like he was the top guy or anything like that. I mean, and I do want to, since I probably we won't talk about Ueno very much going forward, but him and Hayabusa, obviously they ended up making up years later, and Hayabusa, after Hayabusa's injury and everything like that, Hayabusa actually booked him on one of his own promoted shows in 2009. So there was always heat in the 90s and whatnot, but once they got older and everything, it was bygones be bygones.
And one more note that I don't know if you want to comment on, but I found this and I was doing backflips. I couldn't believe that I found this. Dave noted on June 24th, this is in Vegas. There's a company in Vegas. I can't remember the name of the company. Do you know this company? NWC?
I think it was, yeah, something.
I think that's it, NWC. But on June 24th in Vegas, there was a 4-way cage match. It was Cactus Jack, Mr. Hughes, Virgil, and Sabu. And during the match, apparently Sabu used a light tube. He smashed it over Mick Foley's head, and it appears he did a leg drop using the light tube as well. As far as I can tell, I wrote a pretty big article about it. This is, I believe, the first instance of using the light tubes in a match. I want to know if you had any comments on this or any thoughts.
It's actually ironic because you mentioned Sabu being in the match, and I know Sabu hates fluorescent light tube matches. He felt that they were cheap, they don't hurt or anything like that, and he actually was very critical of, and because he's not a big fan of that Big Japan style at all because of the light tubes and everything. So it's ironic that he was one of the first people to do a match with them when he actually hates them.
Yeah, and for anyone who wants to know, I wrote a big article on my website, indiewrestlingintl.wordpress.com. You go back a few issues, and I did a little thing about the history of light tubes, because people have always been asking, what was the first one? And I think that's it, June 24th, 1995. And just two notes, just to go on June 26th, Mr. Chin passed away. We had talked about him previously. And also in June, the trio of Goto, Ganosuke, and Flying Kid Ichihara, they start working for Big Japan and the other indies, so they're getting around as well. Starting in July, IWA starts bringing in a few new names as they start to kind of grow. One guy who's brought in who we haven't heard from in a while is Masanobu Kurisu. What has he been doing since leaving FMW?
He had started working for New Japan afterwards, and then he would end up going to the Now promotion, and then he was working for War up until that point. So that's what he'd been doing, 5 years or so.
Okay. And another one is Dennis Power Godo.
That was Dennis Knight. We talked about him early on too. He had worked FMW at the very beginning. He was Despina Matanaga's brother, and who she married Tarzan Goto. So Tarzan Goto helped get him booked on this show or on this tour.
Cool. And another one is going to be.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to make mention also that he was Phineas Godwin in WWE. For those that didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't know that he had that relationship to Goto. When I read that, I was I was like, oh wow, the family's not that big, I guess. And finally, Terry Gordy is announced for coming in for the King of the Death Matches. Now we're going to talk about the show itself come August, but for Terry Gordy to be brought in, you know, he's a very classic wrestler, a big powerhouse American wrestler. And does he have any feelings about being booked for the deathmatch tours?
Well, at this point, he had already OD'd, so he was already kind of out of it and everything. So I think it was just whatever, I'm getting paid to do what he wasn't the wrestler he was a couple years earlier at this point, and it was probably an easier style because he wasn't doing the All Japan style that he had done years earlier. You know, he had won the Triple Crown before and everything, so I would imagine it was just kind of a payday. And hey, I'll take a couple bumps. But I mean, he wasn't anything like he was after after ODing.
So on July 18th, FMW they opened a tour at Kuroken Hall, and it was the first time that and the main event was a death match between Mr. Pogo and Matsunaga. This is the first time that Mr. Pogo has been on the main event of a card since the May 5th show. What are Mr. Pogo's feelings of the company about, you know, that he's being pushed down the card?
He actually was kind of critical of Onita leaving the way he did and everything to where they had to set up. He kind of was a little bitter towards Onita not pulling someone up among the ranks to continue the deathmatch wrestlers, and so that he could kind of stay on top. So he ended up getting kind of moving to the middle of the card, having his feud with Matsunaga. There's nothing really necessarily new about it. There's, you know, and Matsunaga and Pogo, they can draw, but they're not going to set the world on fire anymore at this point. Their feud had been going on, you know, in two different promotions for 3 years at this point. So he was actually kind of critical of Onita for not really setting up the future and them having to go the route of using Hayabusa as the top guy and having straight matches and everything. But yeah, so he continued his style no matter what.
FMW they ended the tour on July 30th, and Mike Awesome defeated Hayabusa for I believe the third time at this point, or was it the second? He's just losing to Mike Awesome for the past few tours, and during the match, Hayabusa he gets pretty injured. How is Hayabusa's health going as the ace of the company?
Yeah, he's getting banged up really bad around this time period. And so for this match, it's kind of a famous match due to the injury that Hayabusa. I mean, it looks a lot worse than it actually was. So Hayabusa is going to the top rope. And again, this is a show that's outside. It's humid. It's late July in Tokyo, which if anyone's been out there, it's miserable outside. And so he's having a shortness of breath already. And he's going to the top rope, and he doesn't know what move he's going to do at the moment he's even going up. He doesn't know if he's going to do a Firebird Splash or anything. He ends up deciding to do a Shooting Star Press. Well, he does the Shooting Star Press, and due to just all the effects that he was going through, like I mentioned, just the humidity and everything, he doesn't get all the way around, and he ends up he ends up hitting Mike Awesome's body, but kind of halfway through the Shooting Star Press. Well, he ends up, his body kind of goes limp for a second, but he's able to lift his arm up, and he knows, okay, I'm going to be okay and everything like that. But also during the process, he cut his he cut a part of his neck a little bit, and so you see this blood all in his mask and everything. Well, Shoshi Arai sees that, and again, and there was a history with Mike Awesome and Hayabusa years earlier where we talked about where Mike Awesome just beat the crap out of Hayabusa until he was vomiting blood. Well, Arai sees the blood all in his mask and thinks that this has just happened again, that Hayabusa is vomiting blood and everything, and so he calls 911. So after the match, Hayabusa, they go right to the finish, and Mike Awesome defeats Hayabusa, and they go. There's an ambulance waiting for Hayabusa, and he goes, I don't need this," and they go, "No, you gotta go to the hospital." So he goes to the hospital and they do x-rays and they say, "No, there's nothing that can be done here, but your body's beat up real bad. You're going to need some long-term rest and you're going to need to take a couple months off." Well, Hayabusa refuses that. I mean, that would mean he's going to miss the Grand Slam tournament that we just talked about, where he wants to prove he's the ace of the company and everything. And he knows he just can't take time off. It's been 2 months or 2 or 3 months that he's the ace of the company. And this is the company that Atsushi Onita went through and destroyed his body and he can't just take long-term time off after just 3 months. So he ends up just keeping the pain to himself. He doesn't tell anybody. Every time he's on the bus, the FMW tour bus, every time there's just a bang due to the just while driving on the bus and there's a bang due to the road, he ends up feeling that he's in so much pain, and he ends up, and we'll talk about it as we get later on, but it ends up getting worse and worse as time goes by because he just refuses to let his body heal.
And is this from his style? Like, why is he getting hurt so badly?
Yeah, I mean, it's the style. It's just his body just not really, I guess, being used to just the main event style of having matches against Mike Awesome and just being dropped on your neck and everything. But also, again, yeah, he's also doing these high flying moves on top of that. So he's getting, and also, he had an exploding barbed wire cage match and against Onita, and he was wrestling 12 days later, and just things like that where he never let his body heal. The time off between tours just wasn't enough, and he knew he couldn't take the time off.
I also wonder if, he also added, 20 to 30 pounds to his frame, and also Mike Awesome, he's a brutal guy to work. I wouldn't want to, he drops guys with that power bomb nonstop. That's a tough guy to be paired with. Okay. Also, at the end of the month, just a quick note that'll come up later on. PWFG and FMW, they team up to trade talent at this time as well. But going into August, obviously, the big story of August is August 20th is the IWA King of the Deathmatch tournament. This is going to be at the Kawasaki Stadium. They also announced that the main event is going to be an exploding barbed wire, exploding ring death match in Kawasaki Stadium. Is it easy to understand why they booked this match in this building?
Yeah, I mean, they were taking it off of FMW. They saw what Onita and FMW was able to do in that building and what they were able to draw with death matches, and they felt that with the right talent and everything, they could have a similar style show that FMW was having. And also, it's kind of an FU to FMW by having it in pretty much their home stadium, essentially. Because when you think Kawasaki Stadium, you think FMW.
Yeah. Do you know whose idea was it to do a tournament of only the death matches?
I'm sure it was Victor Quinones, who was the booker at the time. I think it was just more of to have multiple matches with the top stars, so you didn't just see Terry Funk, because it was still a limited roster to be able to have a mega show like that. So you got to have Mick Foley, or you got to have Terry Funk wrestle 3 times and everything, just so to kind of add to star power, because again, it really was they didn't have an Onita to help draw the building.
Before, we aren't going to go match by match, but this is a pretty famous show. It was my first Japanese show, actually, that I ever saw. And, it's pretty famous. We all have our thoughts on it. What are your thoughts on this show?
Guy, so I grew up loving FMW, so it was kind of competition to FMW. So I mean, it's an okay show. I always kind of considered a cheaper version of FMW, so I don't have the love that a lot of people do, and that have for it. And but it's a pretty good show. I mean, I like the Terry Funk Cactus Jack match, and I like the Dan Severn Tarzan Goto match, and it got its it did what they did what they wanted to do for the most part and everything. But I mean, I don't think this show compares to the FNW Kawasaki shows personally.
Yeah, I think the best match would be the Nakamaki Cactus Jack Spike Nail match. I think that's actually the best one. The main event is supposed to be this exploding barbed wire match. The barbed wire boards blow up, and it's a really good poof and a flame, and they're pretty good. But when they do the countdown, it's one of the more famous screw ups in wrestling. They're supposed to the ring's gonna blow up. The sirens are going off, and you just see four puffs of smoke go up in the air. Why did the explosion go so badly?
They were cheap explosions. Asano, the IWA Japan president, did not put that much money into the explosions. I don't know why. I guess he felt like that as long as there was an explosion, it didn't really matter how much they were. So he just went cheap on it.
Well, we always talked about, I've always talked about how much those explosions in FMW cost, and I think it was worth the money, but
Yeah.
well, that sucks. And what about the payment for the guys? I know various people involved in the show got paid in different ways.
Oh, I don't really know. I know Cactus Jack ended up or they ended up taking the trophy right away from him. He never even saw the trophy after he won it. But I think I'm sure they made decent money and everything, but I don't think they made $300,000 like Onita did for his retirement show or anything like that. I don't think anywhere close to that. So, but I don't personally know how much they made off that show.
Okay. And one more thing I've just got to ask. This is probably pretty famous. I'm sure a lot of people who have seen it, they've seen it through the ICP video, Stranglemania, which featured several matches from IWA at the time. Do you know the story behind this, and if they ever paid for the footage and how that video came to be?
Yeah, no, they just stole the footage, and they actually had a Stranglemania 2 with a lot of FNW footage as well. There was two of them because the first one was so popular. But yeah, no, they just stole the footage and used it. And in WWF in '98, Victor Quinones was backstage and saw Insane Clown Posse, who were working for WWF at the time, and they're like, "Hey, you better pay Mick Foley and Terry Funk for the money," and they end up cutting a check right there. So Mick Foley and Funk ended up getting paid for it, as well as Victor Quinones. But they cut the check right there. But most of the wrestlers, I'm sure, never saw any money from Insane Clown Posse.
On that same note, one guy who I just saw him when I was doing the recaps, and I saw that in ECW at this time, they started doing an angle with Rob Feinstein and RF Video. For those who might not know, RF Video was kind of like the main commercial place to go for videos of like the Japanese wrestling and a lot of indies. And I always wondered, did they pay for any of their footage, and where did that company come from?
No, they just bought it from Jeff Lynch, who was probably the best known Japanese tape dealer at the time. He has literally over 100,000 Japanese wrestling tapes. He still does it. He's been doing it since 1989, and just Rob Feinstein would just buy from him and then sell the tapes right afterwards.
Did any company ever try to get any money from him?
I don't think so, because they're mostly through Japanese, but he had that deal with ECW to do the fan cam and everything, and so that was part of their company, or part of the money they'd make. But no, I don't think anyone really. I mean, I know a lot of people hate Rob Feinstein, but I don't think FMW or anything like that ever went after him. I know he actually toured with FMW with Dave Meltzer there in '96 or so, but I don't think no one ever came up to him or anything.
Okay. Okay, going back into the news really quickly, going back to IWA, the day after the King of the Deathmatch show on August 21st, IWA taped the Bathhouse Deathmatch, which this is another pretty famous tape that gets tossed around. What was the Bathhouse Deathmatch?
Well, what it was Terry Ito, who was a TV producer in Japan, came up with this idea of kind of having like is pretty much making a wrestling match into like a TV or a movie kind of. And so what it was he had Tarzan Goto and Mr. Ganasuke against the Headhunters, and there were a couple other matches on this tape. And that what they did was they wrestled in kind of like the main area of a bathhouse, and then they would end up brawling and going into the bathroom or the bathhouses of the men and the women. So you see Headhunter A and Mr. Ganasuke brawling in the men and the women's bath. So you see naked women, you see nude, well, men with towels and everything, trying to get away from these two or all these wrestlers brawling and everything, and using the bathtubs, turning up the heat and everything. But it was kind of done, like I said, as a movie because they had a professional producer. Getting filming and putting production and everything into the tape.
Yeah. It's one of those famous tapes that just gets passed around. I know I had it as a kid, and it's something. It's different. So going
Yeah,
back
that was one of my first tapes I saw.
yeah. Going back to FMW in August, they run the tournament for the Brass Knuckle Championship. If you could quickly, what notes come out of this tournament, and how is Hayabusa's health doing?
Yeah, so the main thing is Hayabusa is kind of the main focus of this promotion of the tournament and everything. He ends up getting a win against the Gladiator Mike Awesome on September 5th at Sapporo Nakajima's Sports Center, and that's a really big win for him. It's the first ever big singles win for him. Followed by that, he ends up defeating Mitsuhiro Matsunaga 2 days before the finals of the tour, and that's again another big win to set up. And he ends up advancing into the finals of the tournament again to take on Mike Awesome. And like I was saying, his body. Hayabusa's body is just breaking down at this point. He can't even sleep anymore. He's pretty much discovered that the only way he can even go to sleep because of the pain is to just drink. And so throughout this tour, after the show, he's going out and he's drinking so much that he passes out so that he can sleep, because he's not able to sleep anywhere else or any way else because of just how bad his body is. And he's the pressure of just trying to follow Atsushi Onita and the style that his body is just breaking down at this point. But he got two major wins against, like I said, the Gladiator Matsunaga, to lead to the finals against the Gladiator, and he ends up taking some. Also has to go to the hospital right before the show and take painkillers to be able to have the match against the Gladiator at Corrigan Hall. And like I said, the Gladiator ends up getting the win and defeating Hayabusa to win the Brass Knuckles title, to win the Grand Slam tournament. But and Hayabusa didn't get the victory of the tournament, but he ends up, this is where Hayabusa kind of has established himself as a star. And also I wanted to make mention, the tours before, the tours were always struggled. They always struggled with the tours and everything, but they always were able to still pack Corrigan Hall. They still were selling out Corrigan Hall, even though they're getting 250 fans and everything like that. They still were able to sell out Corrigan Hall and make good money, make about $45,000 profit for each Corrigan Hall show. And this is probably the biggest Corrigan Hall show at the time for them, because they concluded on a big tournament and had a big match. And I mean, it was a great match. It was a great tournament, and it helped get Hayabusa over as well. And people kind of really start to see Hayabusa as a top guy after this tournament, and due to the wins that he got, as well as just kind of being the main star and main focus of the tournament.
All right, cool. And also during this tour, Mr. Pogo would wind up leaving FMW. Why did he leave?
They just were not able to afford the contract. I made mention that he was making $10,000 a tour or a month, and so $120,000 average a year. They just did not have that money anymore to be able to, when they were pushing Mr. Pogo down the card. And Shoichi Arai ended up coming up with the plan of of just kind of taking away the money, pretty much downgrading the money that Mr. Matsunaga and Mr. Pogo were making, and giving more money to the Hayabusas and giving more money to the FMW, kind of the ones that came in through the system, because like I may mention, Onita gave them such high contracts just to get them out of Wing, get them away from Wing, and even with all the money or with all the even with all the drawing ability that Onita had and all the shows that were doing great business and everything, like I may mention, they still were not making a profit, the company itself, and Arai just could not afford these contracts and ended up having to offer them less deals. And Mr. Pogo just decided, I'm going to go work elsewhere, and Mr. Pogo actually became the very first freelance Japanese wrestler working different companies, because at that time you worked your home base company, or you worked where you had a contract with. You didn't go from promotion to promotion. And so Mr. Pogo decided he could make a better money just going to different promotions and being the top monster heel for a couple shows.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. Going into October, this is just a small note that I wonder if this came because of like any specific thing. But Kurokan Hall announces that they're going to be banning fire, in the building. Now, obviously, there was the 2000 Big Japan Shadow WX fire incident, which was a very big deal. But was there anything that happened in this time that led to the banning of fire in the building?
No, I think that they just saw Mr. Pogo was doing it every show, and there's that danger that about, or the Shadow WX thing, where someone could get seriously hurt, or a fire could end up spreading, and next thing you know, the building's burned down. And so I'm sure it was just one of those things where the fire marshal just said this is not allowed anymore. But I think what it was with the Big Japan thing was, no, we can get along, we can get away with this. No one, they're not really. It was just something they made mention. We can get away with it. But now I'm sure that they'd shut the promotion right down if they did that today. I think the Shadow WX thing definitely made fire banned from Corrigan Hall for good, because you're not even supposed to smoke in the building anymore.
Yeah, the big thing is, he ran into the crowd, engulfed in flames, and he wound up injuring fans and everything as well. That was a big, big deal when it happened. So staying with the story, on October 28th, FMW, they ran their first non-sellout of Kurokan Hall in 2 years, and I think this is only going to be the second non-sellout ever for the company. This show advanced a lot of stories. What are the big notes from this show?
And Matsunaga team up, because I may mention in the tournament, Hayabusa defeated Matsunaga, and Matsunaga shook his hand afterwards to show, wow, you earned my respect. And so they form a team, as well as to take on Wing Kanemura and Masato Tanaka, who earlier, back in July, they had competed in a young Lions type tournament for FMW, with Kanemura winning, and they embraced each other. So they had kind of a friendship and everything. So they end up having this bloody match where Hayabusa gets unmasked, and Kanemura and Tanaka are cutting him up open with a barbed wire bat, and Hayabusa is just bleeding all over the place. Hayabusa ends up getting the win against Tanaka, and all four of them embrace. And afterwards, Hito comes out, and the rest of the Wing group start attacking Hayabusa and Kanemura, and Hito's all upset, going, "Hey, you guys we're Wing, we can't be aligned with FMW. What's going on? And this is BS and everything." So it ends up setting a match with kind of the Wing guys kind of having their own inner promotional type fight, or inner group fight, because of part of the group taking exception to the fact that they're kind of being buddy with the FMW wrestlers.
Are any of the other higher paid guys thinking of leaving at this point? Like, the Wing Kanemura and stuff?
Well, actually, Kanemura, he actually got a deal with Arai to where his money would stay the same. So he actually always kept his $120,000, $1,000 or $10,000 every month. He ended up keeping that contract until the very end with FW. So there was any temptation for him to leave. And we'll get into this years down the line. He ended up really hating the entertainment aspect of the promotion, but he loved his money, how much money he was making. He knew he couldn't make that money anywhere else, so he stayed to the very end. Matsunaga, he ends up, and again we'll talk about it, but Matsunaga ends up leaving after Kawasaki Stadium in 1996 due to his pay getting cut. So yeah, a lot of the guys were not fans. Gladiator ended up, I think he ended up making enough to where he'd want to stay and everything, and up until about 98. But yeah, so yeah, it definitely affected a lot of the top guys, and like I said, Matsunaga and Pogo end up leaving as a result, essentially.
Okay. And also on October 29th, FMW, they ran an outdoor show, and the main event was a 6-man barbed wire death match thing. And this is only the second time that they've ran a death match on top. Is there, like, why did they do this? Was there any push to put the death matches back on top? Was this an experiment or something?
No, it was just like you said, it was outside, and so they can kind of get away with more when it's an outside building. You're not dealing with, kind of dealing with whoever runs the building and everything. So you're kind of able to get away with more, and it was just to kind of establish, or it was just kind of have something else different on the show. To have something else different on the show.
Okay. And also, one more note that if you don't know anything about this, that's fine, but I had no idea about this. Around this time, big Japan, they start doing a lot of involvement with some Vale Tudo companies in Brazil. They want to hosting a couple matches. They send some talent there to train. Do you know what this inter-promotional feud was?
It was great. Kojika and Kendo Nagasaki were very into Vale Tudo. Kojika would have Vale Tudo matches in Big Japan like up into 97, 98 or so. He was something he was really interested in. And Nagasaki went to Brazil, train in Vale Tudo. So it was just something that the owners were very interested in. Also, before we move on, I just wanted to make mention about that outside show we just talked about. Also, the fact that it was a wing versus wing match. Also, so that was another thing. Wing kind of symbolized death matches, and so it was because, like I made mention, the Matsunaga and Hito were feuding and everything. So it was another thing of this can be a death match because, and there's a reason behind it because the day before Hito and Matsunaga and the wing group were, because of who's in it, we can have a death match. So I just wanted to make mention of that also.
Okay, cool. One note I wanted to ask, and you might not know anything about this, but I'm noticing in the photos of the tours, the past couple shows, the past couple bigger shows, Hayabusa has been losing his mask a lot, and he just continues with the matches, or maybe he'll take it off after the match. Is there any reason behind him not caring about the mask being torn off?
Well, no, he, as far as the character goes, he cares. He doesn't want his mask torn off at this point. It wasn't anything like, there was no real history with Hayabusa and the mask. Most people knew what Hayabusa looked like. He worked 3 or 4 years in or I guess 2 years plus in FMW without a mask. Everyone knew he was Eiji Ozaki and everything, so everyone knew what he looked like. But so it wasn't something like taking off a historic luchador's mask or anything like that, but also it allowed to get heat on the guys he was taking on, as well as it allowed him to get cut open and everything. So he was a really good blader, ironically enough, for having a mask for the most part. He still got cut up quite a bit, and he was a good bleeder, so they took advantage of that as well, and when they would have his mask taken off. So it was just a way to get heel heat.
Yeah, I know when he came back, there was talk about if he would keep the gimmick, and I thought maybe they were trying something else to get the girls on his side, to expose his face more or something. In business news, just really quickly, PWFG, they announced that they're going to be going out of business this month. Who are the PWFG alumni that we might know?
That was Yoshiaki Fujiwara's company, and they all ended up pretty much becoming Battle Arts. So Yuki Ishikawa, Daisuke Ikeda, just pretty much It would have, yeah, it essentially just became the Battle Arts promotion after it closed down.
Okay. And also, one quick note. This is the time period where Sabu left ECCW and he wrestled for WCW for a while. During this match, I'm sorry, during this month, he made his return to the ECCW arena. Why did Sabu not fit into the WCW mold?
Well, he just hated it. He hated being there. He just, it wasn't his type of style. He was kind of felt restrained, and he wasn't able to really do what he was best known for. And I mean, at this time, also, Sabu's kind of at the height of his popularity and everything, and his body isn't really broken down or anything like that. And so he's able to do these crazy moves that he was able to do that got him over. And he was never gonna, again, that's an issue that everyone dealt with in WCW, but he was never gonna get past the mid card or anything like that. And I think he's someone that would just rather be in a small pond, or big fish in a small pond. I mean, that's the reason he turned down WWF years earlier. I'd rather I'd rather be a top guy in ECW, or I think at that time he had a New Japan deal and everything, but it just didn't work out. He ended up wanting to go back to WCW in 2000 and had a really big contract and everything, but things happened and didn't work out.
Yeah, I want to talk about that when we get there. And finally, on November 20th, Mr. Pogo, he actually returned for one show. He did an angle attacking Hayabusa. What was the story with him coming back? Obviously, he's still on pretty good terms with the company, I'm guessing.
Yeah, no, Shoichi Arai actually loved Mr. Pogo. They got along great, and I mean, it was just a business thing where we just can't afford to have you to pay that contract and everything, but they could pay him for certain shows, and so he ended up becoming kind of, like I said, just a freelance worker, but he still would work FMW when they were willing to pay him, and they brought him in for this show where he teamed up against with Super Leather and took on Hayabusa, and he ends up carving up Hayabusa really badly here, and actually cuts up his chest, and it's a deep cut that would turn into a scar. That Hayabusa had a scar on his chest for the rest of his life due to how just badly he just cut him up with his knife and everything. So he ends up defeating Hayabusa in the match, and it ends up resulting in FMW and Wing feuding, having kind of the, because like I mentioned, they had a feud, or they had grouped up together with Matsunaga and Kanemaru, and Hayabusa and Tanaka had grouped together after their match. Well, now there's already conflict and everything because the FMW guys felt like the Wing guys were behind Mr. Pogo and everything like that. So there's already conflict after a couple shows.
All right. So we're kind of winding up the year here. On December 10th, FMW ran Kuroken Hall with the return of Jason. Just quickly, which Jason was this?
That was Roberto Rodriguez, the original Jason the Terrible that had been in Wing and everything.
Right. And on December 21st, FMW and Michinoku Pro, they didn't hold a joint show, but there was a lot of Michinoku Pro talent on it. They ran in Yokohama. What are the notes from this show?
Yeah, so this was kind of their first big show besides the Sapporo show in September. This was the next big show in December, their end of the year show. And I want to make mention also, FMW was able to get a couple sponsors, and like I mentioned, they started off doing really poorly, and in May and June and everything like that. And Atsushi Onita had actually told Arai, hey, if FMW is still struggling in 6 months and you're just losing money, you need to just close it down because this is never going to make money. We're at about the 6-month point, and FMW is actually starting to show, starting to make some money, and that's one of the things I like about this time period, where it started off slow and not a lot of fan interest, but we're 4 or 5 months in and people are screaming for Hayabusa and the fans are getting into everything and they're starting to draw better. And like I may mention, they were able to get some sponsors and the Young comic, it was a comic book called Young, and they became a sponsor to FMW and they sponsored this show. So which Yokohama Bunka Gym is a pretty big building and everything, and the main event of this show was Hayabusa, Great Sasuke, and Koji Nakagawa against Taka Michinoku, Super Delphin, and Ricky Fuji. And the finishing spot is Hayabusa hitting the Phoenix Splash and defeating Ricky Fuji. All right, so Hayabusa, like I may mention, Hayabusa is dealing with all these injuries, and actually around this time period, he actually he ends up suffering his worst injury, which he ruptured his tricep, and so he ended up getting a poke to the eye also around this time period, and he ends up getting a bloody eye to where he could barely see as well. And so he ends up being able to go through this match, and it's a really good match if for those who haven't seen it. It's a good mix between the FNW style and the Michinoku Pro style and everything. And so it was a pretty successful show, and like I said, they had a sponsor for it. And FNW looks like it's starting to rise going into 1996, but at this point Hayabusa's body is just breaking down so much, and after the show, Shoichi Arai goes up to Hayabusa and he goes, "You got to take the January tour off. Your body, I can tell, your body is just bad off." And like I may mention, he just tore his tricep. He can barely see, and he can deal with injuries and everything, but with vision, he couldn't. You can't even really see your opponents when you're pretty much blind in one eye. And so Shoichi Arai saying, "You've got to take off the next tour in January to recover." And Hayabusa goes, "No, let me work January and then I'll take some time off." So at this point, Hayabusa is becoming a mainstream celebrity as well. Like, he's actually kind of getting some attention, but his body is breaking down. And like I mentioned, they were able to get sponsors. He's actually in a national commercial around this time period as well. So the Hayabusa name is getting bigger and bigger. The popularity of FNW is starting to grow. Things are starting to look up. Things look so gloomy in May and June, but now 6 months in, some money's coming in, some popularity's coming in, but Hayabusa's breaking down, and so that leads into 1996, where a lot of chaos happens.
All right, we're just around the corner from that. And finally, on December 22nd, FMW, they ended the year at Kuroken Hall with a women exclusive show. In the main event, Megumi Kudo faced off with Shark Tsuchiya in a barbed wire death match, which is, even by any standards, is pretty violent and pretty gruesome. What type of publicity did they get for doing this type of a match?
It wasn't. I mean, there wasn't that much publicity. They were able to make a commercial video out of this show alone. They were able to sell out Korakuen Hall, though, just based off it. So again, it shows how Megumi Kudo was able to become a draw, also based off even though she's in mid-card matches, she was able to sell out Korakuen Hall in a one-match show. So, and yeah, like you may mention, this is brutal and gory. Kudo is bleeding all over, cuts herself deep in this match, and she's bleeding, but she's able to defeat Shark Tsuchiya with the Kudumi driver, which is the vertebraker, the first time that move had been ever used, which I think most people would know Shane Helms would use in WCW.
Yeah. Now, also at this show, maybe you can help, because there's a couple different stories going on, but apparently Onita and Mr. Pogo appeared at this show. Is that true?
Well, Onita just came to the show itself to watch, and also I want to make mention around this time period, Onita has pretty much closed himself off of FMW and all wrestling. In his office, you're not even allowed to bring a wrestling magazine in the office, and so he's not keeping tabs at all. But he ends up agreeing to go to this show to see Megumi Kudo wrestle, and he's not a fan of the new style of FMW from what he's hearing. He's hearing, oh, it's Hayabusa, or it's Eiji Izaki, he's on top, and it's boring, plain wrestling. It's not what you used to do, Onita type things. But he wants to go see Megumi Kudo wrestle in a death match. It's more his style, and he has a connection with Kudo, and he goes to the show, and Mr. Pogo kind of cuts his own angle here to kind of get it going to where, like, hey, look, let's have an match, because like I said, Pogo's kind of drowning here, not having Onita anymore. He just made all this money being on top with FMW, and as soon as Onita's gone, he's kind of pushed to the middle, and then his pay is, they can't afford his pay and everything. So he's just looking at any possible way to kind of get attention to, because everyone kind of knows Onita is coming back, and at this point, Onita himself does not know he's coming back. But Mr. Pogo's just trying to get it to where, like, hey, let me set this angle up. Let me challenge you in front of this reporter and get the cameras on and to set up a match. But it didn't lead anywhere, because, like I said, Onita at this moment is in the mindset of, I'm done with pro wrestling. Now, in a couple months later, his mind will change. But at this time period, he hasn't thought anything about wrestling in 7 months.
And we talked earlier that he was going to film, some type of samurai show and stuff. Was Onita's post FMW 6 months? Did it treat him well?
Not the way he wanted to. And around this time period, also, like I may mention, he's not he doesn't want wrestling magazines or anything like that in his office, but he still calls Shoichi Arai almost every night. He still wants to talk, because there was a friendship there before Onita left and everything. So he's still calling Shoichi Arai just to kind of vent. And, Onita's not married or anything like that. He's just sleeping with different women each time, and they don't know anything about his what's going on in his life. Shoichi Arai and him were friends. They were close friends. And so he's calling Shoichi Arai every other night or so just to complain about there's a reason why he ended up wanting to come back soon. The fame didn't really come. He didn't gain fame. He was famous from wrestling, but he didn't take it to another level. He didn't become The Rock or anything like that, where start as a wrestler and become famous across the country and everyone knows who he is. He was still famous based off his wrestling. It was like a famous wrestler being a movie star or being a TV show. It wasn't his own brand or anything like that. And so he struggled with that, and he dealt with issues of kind of, he's not getting that high of being the popular wrestler every night having a show and stuff. And so he's dealing with all these issues of not being just what he was for the last 6 years or so. It's a drug. I mean, I've talked to Ricky Fuji about this, even, where it's like everyone comes back because it's a drug that you just, especially at that type of level of Onita. And that's the reason Onita kept coming back, was he couldn't get over that drug.
Going into a couple show notes, on December 26th, Tarzan Goto and talent from IWA and Big Japan, they ran a show called Real FMW. We've talked about it before with the Wing Army. Was there any heat from FMW over using this name?
I don't think so. I don't think. Again, now we're Shoichi Arai's in charge and everything. Shoichi Arai liked Tarzan Goto, and it wasn't like it was taking away from the audience. No one was confusing Tarzan Goto's FMW for Hayabusa's FMW. I think due to the respect that Shoichi Arai had for Tarzan Goto, nothing ended up happening. Technically it's a different name. It is Real FMW. It's not. They're not using they don't own that right to the letters FMW, so using the different name with FMW, I don't think they could have any legal issues anyway. But like I said, I think Shoichi Arai respected Tarzan Goto. I'm sure Onita would have, if Onita was still in charge, he would be offended by it or whatnot, be upset by it. But I think Shoichi Arai just let it go.
All right, and one last question. IWA, for the past couple months, they've been doing nonstop main event death matches with thumbtacks, barbed wire, glass. They had a fire match with Terry Funk. They've done spike nails and stuff. How are IWA's attendance doing compared to FMW?
around this time period, it's starting to struggle. After the Kawasaki Stadium show, that's really kind of started to struggle. They still were keeping afloat and everything, but that popularity that they had in late '94 and early '95, it wasn't the same. They started kind of going down the attendance, and a lot of it was blamed on Tarzan Goto being put on top and everything as well. They felt that a lot of people felt that Goto on top wasn't the draw that they were hoping for and everything. So, I mean, it's staying afloat, but they're it's starting the ship is starting to sink a little.
On that note, just a question about trends. Do you think that the fan base is just kind of tiring of the brawling deathmatch style? Because when the Tokyo Sport Awards came out, the only deathmatch related person on there was Masato Tanaka won Rookie of the Year, and he actually tied with Daisuke Ikeda. Whereas in the past, the death matches were winning the best match of the year. Many of the deathmatch workers were winning, the best rookie, the best this, the best that, and now they're kind of disappearing. So do you think the fans are kind of growing tired of it, of the brawling style?
I think that Onita leaving really hurt the fact that death matches, because I think I haven't made mention FMW when when Onita left and everything, they had to develop a whole brand new audience and everything. So all those fans that were deathmatch fans of Onita and FMW, they didn't go to IWA Japan or Big Japan. They just stopped watching wrestling and stopped following it. And so with IWA Japan, it's kind of one of those things where if it's popular, something's super popular, the other groups kind of get the benefit from it. So FMW is super popular at this time, and so these fans are getting into deathmatch, and then they're kind of, oh, let's see what IWA Japan is, let's see what Big Japan is, and stuff like that. And without Onita that FMW style, there was no new fans really coming in. So IWA Japan was having to just cater to their own fan base that they had. They weren't bringing in new fans, really, I feel like. And you not bringing in new fans, sometimes, yeah, the fan base that you do have is eventually going to get tired of what you're doing and having those same style of matches and everything. And also IWA Japan, like I said, Tarzan Goto wasn't the draw that they were hoping. They didn't really have like this main Japanese draw. They had Cactus Jack, and and the fans loved him and everything, and they loved Terry Funk, but they weren't even on every tour. And so you have, on when they're not on the tour, then they have Tarzan Goto, who's not drawing like they were hoping. They never really established their own guy, and so that's something that really hurt IWA Japan. Was they didn't have their own dojo, they didn't have their own homegrown talent and everything. It was just kind of the leftovers from Wing, and that style from Wing, which when Wing started up, it was hot and it faded. So it was kind of the same thing, the same mindset, the same result pretty much that happened to IWA Japan.
Final question, and we can ask this for every year for the next 5 years and everything, but I'm just going to ask it once. Was Hayabusa the guy to go to, or was, looking back on it, what do you feel about that question?
Yeah, no, I think so. I also want to make mention that Kanamura actually had wanted to be in the Onita death match, because he felt like he was more of an established name and everything than Hayabusa. And so there was always kind of a bitter feelings personally with Kanamura and Hayabusa. They never really got along. So a lot of the wrestlers, they didn't necessarily know if Hayabusa was the guy. I know Kanamura didn't. He didn't feel that Hayabusa was the guy. But I think that I think that Hayabusa was the guy. I think you had to be different. And Hayabusa was the perfect guy to be different than Onita. You couldn't just have, Kanemaru's, like I said, Kanemaru's thinking like, we should just do Onita, have another Onita guy on top, and that be me or, Matsunaga or something like that. But it just wasn't going to, having a junior FNW style of just the non-Onita death matches wasn't going to survive. And I mean, they already were struggling with Hayabusa, but I think that it was the right pathway. It just ended up, due to all of Hayabusa's injuries, and we'll get down the line, Hayabusa's injuries keep coming up and everything, and that actually is what ends up killing FNW. But it's if Hayabusa had stayed around and everything, and they had a good game plan, it would have worked out eventually in the long run. But a lot of things came up, but most notably his injuries. But like I said, I think that they had the right mindset of, we got to be completely different. We got to have work base. We got to have kind of the straight good matches and everything to be different than what Onita's FMW was. I just wanted to let everyone know that Super Battle FMW is actually coming back in April. They're going to hold 2 shows. I don't know how they're going to draw, but there's 2. They got 2 shows booked in northern Japan. They're pretty much house shows, but I don't. There's the main draw really on the poster is Kanemaru, who won't even be wrestling. So I don't know how well they're going to do, but they're going to hold 2 shows for the first time in 4 months since December. But as far as plugging, if you can find that out, as well as a lot of other information on FMW, the history of it, bahufmw.com. I have an Instagram at bahufmw world. I also have a YouTube page, Brett FMW, and I just recently came out with a Mr. Pogo career video, which spans about 22 minutes of his entire career.
Yeah, and those videos are awesome. I love watching those, and just because if you ever want to know whatever happened to this person, your videos cover it all. It's great stuff. For me, if you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter at INTL Wrestling. I got a website, INTL Wrestling, Indie Wrestling INTL.wordpress.com. Just kind of cover a lot of deathmatch news from the U.S. and the Japanese companies as well. I think between me and Brett, we've got every deathmatch nook and cranny covered. So, thank you so much for listening. I can't wait to see you if you come back for the next show where we're going to go into 1996, and the business is just going to keep on splintering more and more and more. So, I'm excited for that, and thank you for joining us.